welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us in this conversation with the filmmakers behind Solutions Films That Work, part of the Redford Center's Films That Move program. My name is Arti Govind, and I'm a program and evaluation officer at the Redford Center. I would like to now introduce you to the people who filmed these stories. So first, I would like to invite on camera Danny Khan de Silva, director of Nuraga Bhumi. Next, I would like to introduce Katchajuni Fox. I invite you to come off camera, Katchajuni. And Katchajuni is the director of Kaneonwe, Original Seeds. The next two filmmakers I'd like to introduce are Ivan Serna and Salim Benzegia. They directed and produced Enraizados. And finally, we have Clara Wetzel, director of Zag, Tall Trees Have Deep Roots. And I now invite all of our filmmakers back on camera and Havane, who is going to take the discussion from here. Thank you so much.
Mahalo piha for all of the ho'olauna. Thank you to all of the filmmakers for joining us today and for sharing these messages from people featured in your films. I'd love to move into asking you about your films and the messages and actions you hope to inspire in our audience. And so our first question is, what do you hope audience do after watching your film? Can you also briefly describe your impact efforts alongside the film?
Yes, hi. So I'm Yvonne. This is my co-director Selim for Enraizados. And I think for us, what we really want is for people to listen and then take that listening sort of like into amplification. I think like much of what Danny said, we felt there was a huge need of sort of like recognizing all of the challenges that indigenous communities in the context of the Purepecha people in Mexico have experienced, but also seeing the way forward that those challenges have put in front of us. Something that really inspired us to do this film was the solutions aspect of it. I think that when it comes to, the climate crisis, we tend to focus so much on everything that is wrong and that is hard to fix. Because yes, it is a very, very, very hard problem. But I think it also comes to a lack of imagination. And a lot, I think, of that also comes from a lack of connection to our own histories and roots in certain places. So sometimes when we think about the future, I think we tend to fantasize about things that haven't existed yet when many of the solutions have already been set in place for like generations in many of these places. So for us, we really hope that the film will be able to spur at least some imagination that there are possible futures that are different from what we have now, and that many of them are already, in fact, rooted in place.
Yeah, I think that, we see this here also in our movement where, the lack of imagination because of colonization has, put a lull, it feels, onto all of our movements. But there's always been someone or a group of people who have seen through that and have like lifted the veil. There's generations of people who decided to still feel and to still pass down all of this ancestral knowledge that we still have. And when we look at that, colonization wished for us to forget. And we're still here, we still know because somebody never forgot. And so, yes, 100% to everything that you said. Mahalo nui for sharing.
The movie Zag, one of its main threads is actually the passing of knowledge and everything that comes to do with the mandate of keeping their language alive. So Nambla, Carl's father, Carl Gakran, who you just saw on the video, Nambla was told by his father, you know your language, so write it. And then Nambla told his son, you know, and you can read our language, so translate it. So Carl is doing the translation work into Portuguese. So for this Gakran family, the transmission of stories and rituals and practices in Xhokleng, later in Portuguese, and around the Araucaria, it's all a very much radical act because it reclaims their connection to the land and connects them to their sacred tree, which is the Araucaria. So I guess going back to your question, in a context where colonization has tried to break those lines of memory, each moment of passing out of knowledge, each moment that they tell the stories to their kids and the kids then later remember it and tell the stories to everyone else, it becomes an act of resistance and a way to rebuild identity, to constantly keep their identity and their culture alive.
Yeah, so my film Ganaue in Mohawk means original seeds. And I think a lot about like I'm wearing a necklace made of seeds, like thinking about all the hands of all the ancestors that have touched these seeds to get it to where it is today, that we still even have these, because these seeds are kind of they're a mirror of us. They've gone through the same things that we've gone through. Even things like food warfare, like the Sullivan campaign, trying to burn all of our crops so that we'd starve in the winter. But our ancestors like went through that and were able to still, save as many of these seeds as they could so that they could be moved forward today. And then now that's our responsibility to be speaking on their behalf and working on their behalf of the seeds. So I'm hoping that we can do that. And I think as filmmakers, it's so important that we're doing the work that we're doing because, and I know this is a later question too, but like we need to see ourselves and we need to show people, remind people about our relationships with everything from the seeds to the trees to the waters, that we have those connections. So, yeah.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think what we try with Enraizados is also to challenge the way that we make film. I feel like we have in documentaries sometimes too much superhero Western view of making film, of like the superhero saving everyone, super strong. In Enraizados, we try, and that's why we choose also the intergenerational different character. It's also to show that the savior or the superhero is the community itself. So it's the younger generation, it's the people continue, and it's also the elders. And the character is not one person, but it's three person that at the end of the film are joined to be together, and this is the community.
Something I really love about the community that Nodagabumi brings together, and it's Indigenous women and LGBT folks from the region of Bukit Lawang in Sumatra, and is that they're so relational, even with the language. Tiger is not just tiger, orangutan is not just orangutan, it's opong, which means ancestor or relative or grandfather or grandmother. And that to me says everything, about how language can really transform and become a radical act of resistance and decolonization. One of the things that really affected their communities and the transmission of knowledge was the Dutch removal, like not only the genocide in Sumatra that has not been addressed appropriately, but also this stealing all of their holy books, all of their written books that have the language that hold a lot of their ceremonies and stories that haven't been returned. That's something that really separates, the younger generations from their past. And so reclaiming those things and again, relearning the language, I know that that's really been important for Nyla and for her community in terms of reclaiming. And it's just such a complex situation in the case of Sumatra. But yeah, I think like if you know the forest the way that your grandmother did, you're less dependent on like external experts to tell you what's valuable or how to protect it or how to live with it. Yeah, and for women especially, passing on knowledge is a way of saying like we're not only caretakers of the culture or the land, we're decision makers that shape the future of our land. So it's not just nostalgia, intergenerational knowledge transmission. It's the strategy, and it really, yeah, keeps identity alive. It challenges colonial definitions of conservation and just ensures that the next generation has those tools, like you said. I do want to move to the next question. Autonomy and self-governance show up in all of these stories, not just as a political goal, but also as an ongoing and daily practice. How are these communities navigating the tension between reclaiming self-determination and operating within ongoing systems of colonization and imperialism?
I think like for me in the film, Ganaue, the women that are in the film are never working in isolation. They're always working in community, like somebody was talking about earlier. And I think that that builds that strength. Like Angie Ferguson is working with Braiding the Sacred. It's all native corn growers. So they all get together and they help each other with talking about like the climate change and what's going on with the seeds and how are the seeds reacting to drought and trading seeds to keep them vital. So those kind of organizations are so important to keep people going too. So know that they're not, working in isolation.
The communities in our film in Zag, they're constantly navigating the paradox. On one hand, they're asserting self-governance, cultural sovereignty, but on the other hand, like you were all saying, they're still being forced to operate within external systems, legal frameworks, bureaucracies, land conflicts. Like you may know, the Marco Temporal in Brazil, how big of a conflict that was, and all these were designed without them. So I think the question here, or the food for thought here, is how are we designing these spaces? How do these conversations, these policies take place? And where are these voices? And I guess this is why we're doing film. We're all doing film to try and have these voices be part of these systems so that this contradiction no longer exists.
I think the most important thing is to undermine the system and not try to work within it. For me personally, that's where I've come to. That's where I see the power in a lot of the communities I work with. They don't, Naragabumi and other organizations that I've worked with, they don't aspire to be just another shiny major conservation organization. They do that grassroots work. They take care of their places properly. They know their rivers, they know their mountains. They are, reclaiming identity and authority on their own terms, like whether it's through ritual, land use, their leadership, trying to find ways to push back or against these systems. And that daily balancing act, like so many of you have already said, is itself a form of resistance and survival. And I think that that's, to me, is the most important thing, is where I've come to, is just like, let's just stop operating within these contexts and start undermining it, because like people are the power. And the more we give the system power, the more we lessen our own. And yeah, I think that's all I'll say right now.
We only have a little bit more time, so I'm just going to go to our final question. And that is, what are some practical actions this audience can take to support Indigenous land defenders, seed sovereignty, or community governance?
I think one thing that people can do is to know where their food comes from and to build a relationship with the food. And
Yes.
I encourage anybody to even plant the smallest thing that you can, even if it's in a little planter, just so that you build those relationships. And also to build relationship with the farmers around you, so you know what they're planting and when the pollen's gonna fly and all of
Right.
those things.
I would say plant trees, support Indigenous-led activities, learn whose land you are on. That would be my popcorn.
I feel something that is super important is to make sure that people are resourced, and we all have Indigenous communities where we come from, regardless of where we know it or not. So yeah, look who's around in the area. Maybe there are community-based enterprises, social enterprises. It is the case, at least in Chiran, where you can buy things that you might use anyways, but your money is going somewhere that will actually help the community diversify where they're getting their resources from, and therefore also have more autonomy and self-determination. And there is also a lot of different organizations that are already doing work on the ground that you might look into. I believe the Redford Center is putting together a list of potential orgs that you might consider donating to.
Yeah, I think it's already been said, but really, like, let's stop funding these big conservation orgs, start funding more Indigenous-led initiatives, the grassroots initiatives. And I think for other storytellers out there, something I want to say is like, just to remember that sometimes we're so conditioned that we forget that our films don't have to be designed for the colonial gaze. We can design them for others who will resonate with the deeper, like more uncomfortable truths that lead us to real internal change. And that, yeah, stories can travel further than policy. Like they reach hearts. Because when audiences are really connected emotionally, with the women protecting their forests, with people saving their seeds, with those planting trees, They're more likely to support those struggles, to amplify their demands, question the systems that have been silencing them. And I think we can all really resonate with those themes on some level, as many of you have alluded to. Like we all, I can't say we all, but so many of us deal with that disconnection, that feeling of, loss, grief. Maybe we're not aware of it, maybe we are. But on some level, like these deeper themes, I think resonate because a lot of times I'm being asked to like over explain or educate certain audiences, and I have to remind folks that my films are not for those audiences sometimes. And it's great if they can get something out of them, but just to remember that storytelling doesn't just raise awareness; it redistributes power.
As we are coming up to the hour, I just wanted to thank you from my heart and from my mountain. The storytellers are sacred, and it means for us, sacred means it gives life. So thank you for giving life to all of these mo'olelo, to amplify the stories of the people that are in these films, and for doing the work, for living it, for talking the talk and walking the walk, doing the work. Mahalo piha. Is there any final thoughts before we close that anybody would like to share?
I just want to say, remember those little ones. Like my
Yeah.
grandson that just walked by. Like the work that we're doing is for them and the ones we can't see yet. So I encourage
Yes.
everybody to do that.
And we just saw it. Yes. For the Hanauna Ehikimayana, for the next 7 generations and beyond. I hope all of this lasts far beyond all of us and reaches them. Mahalo, mahalo, mahalo. I'm just gonna call on Arthi to close us out with closing remarks. Ke aloha piaia kākou.
Thank you, everyone, so much. As we close out, I encourage you to visit and sign up at the Redford Center at redfordcenter.org/films that move to gain access to our full season of free environmental films and to continue to follow the work of these incredible people, their films, and their impact. Thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.